In this video, we're going to talk about dealing with court system bias. I do get asked about this a lot. I have a lot of clients that come, that complain, that feel like, their experience with the court or the expert or whatever it is was biased, or that they took the other person's side, or they didn't like them because of, I have people say race and all kinds of different things, because they're a man, because they're a woman, whatever it is, the way they parent, their parenting style, all these different things that we sometimes feel judged on and that we feel people are biased about. And so I get asked this question a lot of, do I think there's bias? And if so, more importantly, how can you deal with it? So we're going to dive into that. But before we do, let me just remind you, if you like the content and find it helpful, don't forget to hit like on this video. Also subscribe to the channel so that you get notified as new videos are released. And look, if you know somebody else that's on this same unpleasant journey as you are, probably, if you're watching this video, share the video with them. So let's talk about bias. Here's the first thing you have to understand. I get asked about corruption also, which I think kind of overlaps a little bit with this, but I find most professionals in the system try very hard to set aside their own personal bias. Okay. I won't say that everybody is successful in that. We are human beings. Okay. First of all, so we inherently have biases, whether we want to or not. Even if we're trying not to, we automatically all do as human beings from our life experiences, our own situations. We have certain ways that we view the world, which are inherent with bias. And I do think that most of us in the industry try to set that aside. I won't say that we're always successful, and I won't say that everybody does that. Okay. Are some people just not very in touch with their internal selves and have done that level of introspection? Yeah, a lot of people haven't. So are you going to come across people that are biased? Yes, in every industry, you're going to. For somebody who's really trying to set that aside and not let that interfere, we're really trying to give people our objective opinions based on our experience with the system and not our own personal experience. I, of course, do have personal experience with co-parenting and going to court over child custody and all that kind of thing. I try to not assume that my experience is everybody's experience, or that my outcomes are going to be everybody's outcomes. I will give you the benefit of my experience. I will share that with you and just tell you what happened in my particular case. But that doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen in your case, because you're a different human being with a different set of circumstances and a different family and all of those things. And sometimes I'm working with clients who have very different worldviews from me, right? Like I am Christian. I am very family focused, and all that kind of thing. I've worked with people who are atheist. I've worked with people who are agnostic. I'm a woman. I work with men, all kinds of different oppositions. So I don't think that just because somebody necessarily has a different worldview from you means they're biased. I think that we can be non-judgmental of people and accepting of other people, even when we don't agree with them. Like I very much have the ability to say, okay, you're atheist. I'm not. That's cool. Let's agree to disagree and we move on, right? And my favorite is when I have somebody that can actually engage in a respectful discussion about that, because that's how you sharpen your own opinions and perspectives, right? But when we're talking about the experts that we're dealing with in these cases, we obviously aren't coming at that in a peer-to-peer situation, right? We're coming at this usually where that person has some control, some influence over our case, and not only our case, but our parenting time with our children, right? Which is a critical piece of our life for most parents, right? We would do anything to be with our kids, parent our kids. We love our kids. We would lay down our life for our kids, most of us. So it's a very different situation than like a peer-to-peer discussion. And you have to understand that, yes, that person might have some bias, but don't assume that at the outset, because I think that will automatically sabotage you. But I think we do have to know our audience, right? We do have to know that, if we're dealing with someone who has a certain view or whatever, that we have to try to speak to them on that level. I'll give you an example of like what one of the things that I do with a client. And the reason that this is important is because you need to understand how to do this with experts, right? How to come at this not just from your worldview or whatever, because hopefully they are respectful of that and don't, judge you based on that. But if you know that this person, or as you go into the conversation, you're listening to what they're saying and you're getting a feel for their perspective and the way they view custody and the way that they view your interactions with the other parent, then that's going to give you a leg up on how you're presenting your information as you talk to this person, speaking in a language they can understand. So, for instance, as I said, I'm Christian. I tend to have a biblical worldview. If I'm talking to another person that's a Christian, then I a lot of times will make scripture references, or I will invoke those types of perspectives because I know that they can relate to that. We're on the same page about that, right? And that that's going to speak to them. If I have somebody that isn't that way, that maybe they're a little more spiritual, right? And they don't come at it from like a biblical basis, but they maybe come at it from more of an energy type perspective and, protecting your energy and not allowing other people to deplete you of energy and that type of thing, then I'm going to speak to that client on those terms. And so that I'm saying it in a way that they can relate to and they can understand. So when you go in with your expert and you start to understand what their kind of worldview is and their process, then you can adapt as you're going along. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't give what your perspective is, but I think that we have to be careful not to assume that somebody is biased just because maybe they don't have the same worldview as us. I think that it's not so much bias, it's maybe they can't relate, right? We're talking apples and oranges. Again, if you're an atheist and you don't read the Bible and you never have, and I'm quoting scriptures to you, how much am I going to influence you? Not very much, because that's not the perspective you come at it with. Maybe you don't necessarily judge me for being Christian, or there's no rub there or whatever. It's just that you don't really fully understand what I'm saying because you don't come at it from that perspective. So again, I'm not asking you to filter your worldview or to hide it. I don't hide the fact that I'm Christian and that's the perspective I come at it with. But I do try to understand if the person I'm talking to isn't coming at it from that perspective. So I think that we have to look at this. And so when I'm dealing with experts or judges or the court or whoever, I will go out and research them and try to find the information. And have they ever been married? Have they been through a divorce? Do they have kids? What do they do in their spare time? How do they come at their life? Because that will tell you a lot about their worldview and their perspectives. And then you can sort of speak to them in ways that they understand and that they can relate to easier. Okay. Instead of you sort of fighting this uphill battle of trying to make your perspective clear. I also like to look at like how long they've been doing this, what their different credentials are, all that kind of thing. Any little extra things that you can gather that are going to give you that insight. And honestly, one of the best things that you can do in regards to your judge is just go watch them. Especially if you're early in your case, just take a day off work, go down to the court and just sit and observe and watch them. Okay. Hearings are generally open to the public. Sometimes they will have a closed trial if they're, talking about sensitive information or situations or something like that. But for the vast majority of the time, hearings are open to the public. And so when you go and you sit in that room, you are getting the perspective of how your judge views the world, how your judge runs the courtroom, how your judge responds when people say and do certain things. And it really will start to give you that insight if they do have some bias as to what their inherent biases are and how those come through in the way that they conduct their hearings. And again, I think most judges really try to strip themselves of that, but we are human beings. I mean, I'm not a judge, but we as people are human beings, right? And we have biases that are going to be there. So when you go into that environment and you can observe it on a day that it's not your case, your emotions aren't going to be high. You're going to be able to absorb more. And if you are the type of person that thinks about energy and emotional level and all that kind of stuff, just from being in that environment, your nervous system will start to regulate and you will be calmer the next time you go in. Whereas if the day of your case is the first time you walk into a courtroom, your emotions, your energy, all those things are going to be through the roof. Okay. And it's going to be a very stressful experience. But if you go ahead of time and you just, one of my clients said, like, I know where to go. I know where to park. I know which elevator to take. I know what floor the courtroom's on. I know how it's laid out. I know where to sit. I know where the bailiff sits. I know how to talk to the bailiff and interact and do things. And then I got to observe all the different interactions in the courtroom and what pleased the judge and what made the judge angry and all that kind of stuff. So again, this all comes back to know your audience. The best way that you can deal with any bias that's there is to know your audience so that you can speak in ways that they can relate to and that they can better understand what you're trying to say about your children and your co-parent and your entire situation in your child custody case. If you'd like more help on working on this, you can go to divorceuniversityonline.com/VIP-coaching. There is information on that page on my group coaching programs for moms and for dads. And there's also information on my premium VIP one-on-one coaching services. If you feel like you just want that really high level of support, you're early in the process, you have a lot of emotional stuff going on, or it's really complex and you've got, domestic violence or protective orders, custody evaluators, therapists, all these experts involved, then you probably need to lean more into those premium level services. So thanks for joining me. I hope it was helpful. I will see you guys next time.